So here is our three-step strategical process for the PTE describe image task. And let's have a look now at strategy 3. So we brainstormed our examples. We've got an idea about how we can talk about this chart. You've then thought about how we can incorporate some of the verbs and phrases into our response, and you've got an idea now about how you can talk about them. Now you need to think about how we can put them into a coherent and logical structure. Now, of course, I'm aware that in this test, you will not have a lot of time to think about how we can do all of this. So it needs to be done very, very rapidly in 25 seconds. But the more practice we have, the more you're going to be able to easily do these three strategies as if you're on autopilot. After all, you only have to be aware of them and think about them in your response at the very, very end. So a logical structure will go like this. We start with the introduction. You could use phrases like the graph shows, displays the number of iTunes songs bought. In this graph, we can see the number of iTunes songs purchased, or the photo image shows a scene building from a distance. This third example is an example of what we're going to use for our describe image in terms of picture and description. So don't refer to that too much now. We'll look at that in the next set of examples. For now, we're only looking at what the graph shows in terms of our statistical information. So the first two examples apply well to that. So think about how we can open it in the same way. The graph shows. In the graph, we can see it illustrates and then give an overall view of what your your y-axis says and your x-axis says. Think of that as your introduction. One sentence. Main body. You are then taking your 2 to 3 features and describing with the relevant vocabulary what was discussed. So think of the 3 ideas we just discussed there in the previous slide. You're going to bring them forward into your main body. Finally, you're going to end off with your conclusion, which is basically a summary about what you have already said. Think about paraphrasing the introduction. That will suffice as a satisfactory conclusion. You could start off by saying something like the information indicates. From the chart graph, we can conclude that. In summary, the chart graph picture has illustrated, recap, and summarize at the very, very end. Introduction, think about your phrases, how we can use one and use it effectively to summarize the entire graph in terms of what the y-axis says and the x-axis says, in terms of what trends we can see. Then you're taking your 2 to 3 main points which you have brainstormed and you're referring to them in the graph. Finally, the conclusions signals as a summary of everything that you've said before. Try not to include any new information here at all. All right. So, based on that, here is a sample answer. We've taken the 3 points together and we conclude them into an answer. Now, obviously, I am a native speaker, so I will probably say this with a great deal of fluency, as well as good pronunciation and good timing, intonation, etc. I'm going to try and say this like I was doing this task fresh. I hadn't prepared an answer. I'm not reading it, nor am I a native speaker. Just so you get an idea for the kind of response you get and how it would be scored. So here goes. The graph is showing that iTunes per phones, and on the one side is a week number to show how many purchases there are per week, and on the vertical graph it shows how many purchases there were per million. So it shows that by week 150 there have been more than 1,000 iTunes songs purchases. That's it. That is an example of a task 1 answer which I've given you. How did you think I did? Do you think I was great even though I was reading it? What do you think about the response? Was it well structured? Was some of the necessary vocabulary also included? And how was my speaking ability overall? Well, this is how this would have been assessed. There was a fairly accurate description of the graph. The person did allude to what the 2 axes talked about in terms of the iTunes being referred to in the y-axis and the number of weeks in the x-axis. And also they referred to some of the information and data very accurately, mentioning that there was week 150 and 1,000 songs purchases. So there was quite an accurate description of some of the information. There, however, was one misinterpretation, and they misinterpreted how many sales there were per millions, as well as 1,000 iTunes songs being purchased. That was a slight misinterpretation in terms of the data, but it still didn't take away from the overall meaning or detract from the information of the accuracy of the data. There are several long instances of language with an even speed and tempo. So I try to give that response at an even speed with a good tempo. That is basically the sort of speed that you want to speak at in the test itself. You don't want to speak too quickly or too erratically, where you speak incredibly fast, stumble over your words, and then completely slow down and lose your fluency. There was a good control of English grammar with a few grammatical errors. You will see where there's ums and ahs. They kind of take away from the structure of the sentence, and that will deter away from the accuracy a little bit. But overall, reading it again, you can see that the response has been constructed using fairly good English in an oral sense as well as a written sense too. The vocabulary has been used precisely, but however, they didn't really talk too much using some of the advanced academic vocabulary for this task. Finally, it was fairly well structured, although a conclusion was missing. So they started off with the introduction. It served to focus and frame the overall graph, and they also included some accurate information with their 2 to 3 points in the middle. There was no real conclusion, but however, if you miss the conclusion, it's not the end of the world. After all, you are still being assessed on your ability to speak about this graph accurately, logically, within 40 seconds. So don't worry too much if you don't get to the conclusion. However, make sure that you do not miss it if you are still within your time limit. How would this response have been scored? Well, it was 35 seconds. So you're looking to speak for 40 seconds. That's how much time you have. So a 35-second response is still quite good. This person probably could have filled in an extra 5 seconds with a bit more of a response, but overall, it was still a very, very good response, as this would have been scored C1. So we think about our common English framework in terms of how we universally score academic English. A C1 would have been on the advanced level of English, above B2. So think of it as an equivalent to IELTS, maybe 6 or 7, or Cambridge CAE, for example. It's a pretty good response. If you're getting a C1 on the day with a response like this, you are doing very, very well. Just an idea about how this might have been gauged. Okay, let's move on to our second example today. The first example was describing a line graph. How do we describe an image? It's a very, very different style of technique that we need to use, as well as different vocabulary and a slightly different approach. And you will likely have one of these styles of tasks to do on the day. So it's a good idea that we know exactly how to respond to this style of question. So let's think of this image in the following ways. What is happening? What are the main details of the scene? You have 25 seconds to think through it and discuss them. So there's a lot of things happening in this image in terms of all the events that are happening, all the people. You can maybe think about the scene. What does the scene tell you? Where are they located? What actions are they performing? And think about how we can systematically go through each of these pieces of information with activities in the scene and map out overall probably what is happening as well. Okay, that's about 25 seconds. Let's see what I got from this information. Okay, so we can see that overall, we can talk about the scene in terms of that there's many people, mostly kids, engaging in activities on the beach. It is a beach scene by the coast, and there are many people doing various things. There is a young boy and girl building sandcastles at the very center of the image at the front. The boy, we can go into more information, talk about how the boy is kneeling over and the girl is bringing a bucket of water to him. Behind them and to the right, we can see that there are 3 children playing football with a ball in the air. We can even go into more information, talk about how the boy is outstretching his arms up to catch the ball. There's one girl behind him touching his back. If you want, even though it's probably not necessary, you can go into more information describing what the children are wearing. Beside them, into the shore side to the left, we can talk about a young child and an older man are looking out to the shore. And then even further out, what are they looking at? They are looking at someone who is rowing by the beach. So I've taken 4 pieces of information from this image, as well as an overall description of the image, and we'll take those moving forward. Strategy 2. Now let's think about some phrases that can be used to frame our description of a picture. So it's obviously good talking about the activities themselves, but how can we use certain vocabulary in order to talk accurately about the image in terms of where things are and the topography of the image, if it will. So when we're talking about different kinds of pictures, we can use some of the following language. The viewer. The viewer is you and me. I am looking at the image. So the viewer is the viewer's perspective. Think of the image previously and the perspective that you would have. A bird's eye view refers to above at the very top, looking down as if you were a bird, and also as well as the viewer audience. We can talk about the audience as well if you like. Location within the image, we can talk about the foreground at the very, very front of the image, the background at the back of the image. In the upper part, we can see here upper, 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 as well as lower, 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 lower. In front of, for example, this mouse is in front of my face. I am behind the mouse. Next to, the mouse is next to me. On the left and on the right, so we have the right and the left that might have been mirrored. I do know my left and right, just so you know, it might have been mirrored. From behind, above, or below. So think about the different ways that we can talk about the image. We can also talk about it in terms of east and west, north and south, center as well. Center. Scene description, and we can talk about, we use the words such as describes, shows a scene, shows an image, place of, from a distance. So like in the previous exercise referring to the chart, we refer to the graph shows, the graph illustrates, the graph depicts. We can talk about the image shows, it shows a scene, it shows an image of blah, 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 blah. We would use this in our introduction for this section, how we can frame the overall image itself. And then finally, if we want to talk about what the picture says to us, what emotions do we get out of it, we can use some flowery language such as evoke, express something, insinuates the perspective of. So get comfortable using some of these phrases and use them on repeat throughout this task. If you get used to using a few of these responses, then use them again and again. You don't necessarily have to be too varied, but you do obviously want to be quite flexible and versatile in your response. So think about mastering as much of this language and vocabulary as you can. All right, strategy 3 for our image. Let's see if we can put it all together. Okay, now let's put it all together into a coherent and logical structure. So we could start off with the introduction. We've talked about the image and what it's referred to. We can start off by saying the phrases such as the picture shows the perspective of, the picture shows a scene, the picture depicts a close-up view of. So how could we actually put this into a formal introduction? We'll take the first phrase. The picture shows a beach scene by the coast on the shore. The picture shows the perspective of a person standing by the beach, viewing various activities on the beach, etc., etc. We're looking to frame the overall image and the context of what is happening with our introduction. Main body, you are taking once again, like the chart and the graph, your 2 to 3 main features and describing with the relevant vocabulary discussed. Remember to use location vocabulary to focus in accurately on the scenes in the image, the foreground, the bottom right, the top left, etc. So if we take our example of the boy and the girl who are building sandcastles on the beach, how would we describe them? Well, I like to think they're in the foreground. They are at the very front of the image, in the center as well. So we could say, in the foreground, at the center of the image, there is a boy and a girl building sandcastles by the beach. The boy is kneeling down on the beach, whilst the girl approaches, walking with the bucket. If you want to take the image referring to the 3 children playing with the football, where would they be located? Well, they would be in the center left of the image, the center right of the image, or the right of the image in the background. So we could say, to the right of the image in the background, there is a group of 3 children playing football. The ball is in the air and there is a boy reaching up to catch it. You could use some of this vocabulary to describe the various parts of the scene. Finally, likewise, with your graph, you would state your introduction and some of your overall details to frame your conclusion. If you don't have time to get on to the conclusion, don't worry too much, because after all, it is just simply a restatement of your introduction, and it's not so worrying if you don't actually get on to that section itself. So take some of this vocabulary and take some of this language and think about how you can incorporate it into your own response.